Hi, everyone. This is Thomas Nuth from Wiz. Thank you for joining Cloud Vulnerabilities Inevitable, Breaches Preventable. We're really excited to be a part of this CSA session. And in this session, we're going to obviously be a little bit biased with the cloud-first approach that Wiz has taken to vulnerability management. But we also want to say that a lot of us, like myself included, come from the industry, and we've seen vulnerability management change. And we're recognizing where cloud has brought vulnerability management and what our customers and industries are challenged with today. And a big part of that is the overall premise of the Wiz approach. And that's the understanding that basically business teams, DevOps, and development, as well as security teams, are inundated with alerts and threats. And a big part of these threats are, of course, vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. This leaves security teams overworked. Their vulnerabilities lack context. They create duplicative efforts. And frankly, they're struggling to help developers prioritize real risks. And guess what? This is also hitting IT. These vulnerabilities have to be patched. And so the cloud security mode of operation needs a new operating model. And we view that from code all the way through runtime, there needs to be a lateral approach. We can't have these silos between code, development, security, and IT. And that's because vulnerabilities, for example, as we're talking today, are a part of our overall risk contextual picture. And this is the Wiz security graph approach. It's not just a cool visualization. It's a way of architecting and risk management programs and remediating vulnerabilities effectively to bring us beyond conventional EPSS or CVSS scoring. CVEs themselves, can be more risky if they have a propensity for lateral movement, if they're close to credentials that have that allow a attacker to gain access to PII, for example. And so understanding vulnerabilities in the context of their related peer risks, like secrets, identities, misconfigurations, data and AI risks, or public exposures, is the context that both business teams and dev and DevOps need, but as well as security teams need as well. On the DevOps side, they need to have a good picture of root issues back to the source and code owner. And of course, context is needed for security teams and vulnerability management analysts to focus on critical attack paths. And so when it comes to vulnerability management, this is the Wiz platform, and the platform itself, as you could see, mirrors that lateral understanding where we have our vulnerability management solution with Wiz Cloud, but it extends to analyzing vulnerabilities in code as well as incident response or cloud detection and response. So vulnerabilities are a part of an overall risk picture, and it's available to a customer with a single set of scanners, most notably a single policy framework with code to cloud context. Traditional tools, we'll cover some of those risks right now, have been limited in a lot of ways, and a lot of that has to do with a siloed view, right? The problem here in a nutshell is conventional approaches, the way that we did vulnerability management in the past is agent-based tools, we could say, is that we looked at vulnerability management almost as in a silo. But the problem is vulnerabilities aren't in a silo, right? They conduct lateral movements. So if there is a vulnerability in code, it's going to move throughout your process, especially with cloud. So this allows vulnerabilities to be recognized, for example, in your traditional vulnerability management scanner, but it might miss them in code or it might miss them in runtime. And the problem is that will, of course, underrate or their risk propensity, but it will also allow users or vulnerability analysts to only have a limited view of context. And that's due to this fragmented visibility. And sometimes they go undiscovered altogether. Like, for example, if a vulnerability is in a container image, this will, of course, also have you underestimate a vulnerability due to the limitations of CVS scoring or EPSS scoring as well. And what is CVS limited by, or what's the reason? Well, with all the different vulnerabilities that are born for the abstraction layers and the expanding attack surface of cloud, and you take into account that up to or over 50% of vulnerabilities are high or critical to CVSS, that just leaves a bombardment of high or critical alerts for vulnerability analysts to basically ship off to IT to patch. And if everything is critical, nothing is. And that's why the Wiz difference is trying to make vulnerability management a team sport. And we think that winning organizations and vendors, for that matter, are doing the same thing. And they're doing that by detecting vulnerabilities earlier. The earlier organizations can detect vulnerabilities in their code to cloud pipeline, the better. They want to be able to make sure that they can also scan as much as possible in parity all cloud security platforms, but they also want to bring a hybrid approach. So if you're cloud first or API first, like Wiz is, you'll also want to have a sensor so that you can scan on-prem. This will allow you to prioritize and remediate vulnerabilities more effectively and apply that business context, because you'll have a complete picture of code to cloud pipeline, but also from top to bottom or cloud to on-prem. This extends cybersecurity's best practices across different teams and therefore tools, departments, and allows you to ultimately simplify and consolidate tool sprawl. And instead of 4 or 5 tools, or at least 2 vulnerability management tools, now you perhaps only need 1. And that allows us to also, of course, take once siloed alerts of a vulnerability found in one part of your network and say, hey, this is part of a bigger picture and related issues or risks, and it should be critical, and we should solve this vulnerability first. So this is that new approach that democratizes vulnerability management, and it can be summarized in 4 steps. Start with the cloud environment first, from PaaS to VMs, container and serverless. You don't want to necessarily care where the vulnerability is. You just want to see where it exists and where else it's related to throughout your network for that whole pipeline view. That allows you to perform deep cloud assessment using traditional scanning methods, whether it be vulnerabilities and missing patches, missing figs, malware, sensitive data discovery, but also external exposure, excessive permissions, exposed secrets, and does a path of lateral movement exist? And that path of lateral movement allows you to prioritize critical vulnerabilities better, right? You're able to see the CVE, how it's entered the network, but you're also able to see that perhaps it has access to an access role, and that it's close to PII, or so on and so forth. And then once you discover it, you want to be able to delegate. You want to be able to patch and remediate quickly. And as we all know, vulnerability analysts need to work closely with IT and different tools. And that's why integrations with patching and service management tools are really important. Also, you want to look for things like one-click remediation where possible. Wherever automation might exist to reduce security response times and increase or decrease that MTTR, the better, right? And then, of course, how do we continuously improve our process? If we find a vulnerability in runtime, we patch it. We also see how it entered the network, and then perhaps we can harden our network by restricting, unnecessary credentials, changing our software supply chain, so on and so forth. We can implement guardrails into code and DevOps so that we can actually restrict and improve our security posture over time. And that is this code to cloud coverage that we talk about that leads to continuous hardening. From code, plan, monitor, operate, deploy, release, test, and then code again. Cloud teams, as well as infrastructure security teams, most notably here, vulnerability management, and other traditional security teams need to work together so that you can continuously improve this process. And that's what's under the hood here at Wiz. We understand that in any mode of a cloud-ready vulnerability management architecture, you're going to need to account for assessment across the application lifecycle. But you're going to also have to prioritize effectively, including attack path analysis, runtime validation. You're going to need to be able to score vulnerabilities reliably. And then therefore, you're going to need to remediate. Like, are you able to provide your user with remediating guidance that's holistic and uniform from code to cloud? And of course, you want to look at, cloud security, cloud CSP coverage, right? Like, is there parity of the CSP that you are using and rely on your network? These are all important things to consider. Now, let's go through a few use case scenarios. One is really important, is to just look at how this would actually operate, in a real-time attack path use case. And let's look at a publicly exposed container that has excessive administration permissions. Now, from our approach at Wiz, we would see this all the time where we'll have our network infrastructure here. We'll identify the CVE. We'll see that CVSS score might be low, but we'll understand the context that it has exposed a container and it's close to credentials that will quickly lead to PII, right? And therefore, this CVE needs to be critical, right? We need to look at the severity level and up level it and patch it immediately. In addition to, what if there's 2 clouds? A multi-cloud environment is quite common in today's age. This should be rated even higher, and we should be able to patch this more effectively going, in the future. And then, of course, not only do we patch it, but we'll harden the network going forward by removing excessive permissions where they're identified so we can prevent this in the future. Another thing is looking at like a Log4Shell scenario where a vulnerability enters the network via exposed VM or serverless, and that we're able to quickly identify that and where it is in the network and identify those that can patch it quite quickly. This approach has made us, pretty popular with our customers at various degrees of cloud modernization. But of course, this is not a Wiz commercial. With that, it's more important to say that wherever you are in your cloud journey, the cloud is expanding the attack surface rapidly. And when you look at vulnerability management, it needs to be unified, right? We need to account for on-prem vulnerability management feeds. We need to, of course, account for those vulnerabilities in the cloud and those vulnerabilities that can traverse both on-prem and cloud planes. And that's why one platform that's able to do that is really important, because that doesn't just offer simplicity, but it offers an ability for you to have a uniform view of risk wherever that vulnerability is. Since this is the cloud, of course, we think it's important that a vulnerability management solution start with the cloud, and that it covers parity of all major cloud vendors out there, or CSPs. Obviously, whatever CSP you're dependent on, it needs to be premier there as well. And you need to really interrogate blind spots, scan everything, including container, registry, security at runtime. Check all of these things out. And you want to be able to do this so that you can thwart lateral movement early. You want to be able somehow to map out attack paths and lateral movement of vulnerabilities across your entire network and teams, so that you can reduce your mean time to respond and hopefully reduce alert fatigue that's bombarding security analysts and IT that have huge patch SLAs, right? And that way you can proactively reduce risk, and hopefully the amount of critical and high risk alerts gets less and less over time. So with that, thank you so much. Assess, prioritize, and remediate for vulnerabilities in the cloud. We do think that while breaches are preventable, there are new ways for you to look at cloud security with Wiz. Thank you.